still not sure what to make of what I filmed last November. Every time I watch the footage, I get the same chill running down my spine, especially at the moment when it raises its hand. That gesture, like it was saying hello, or maybe acknowledging us. I don't know. What I do know is that it happened, I captured it on camera, and it changed the way I think about those mountains forever. Before I get into what happened, you should know a bit about me and what I do for a living. I work for the Washington State Department of Natural Resources, have been for about 6 years now. My job is to patrol the forests looking for illegal logging operations and environmental damage. It's not glamorous work, but it's important. Someone has to do it. These old-growth forests are protected for specific reasons: ecological, environmental, historical. And there are always people trying to cut corners, trying to make a quick buck by taking trees they have no legal right to touch. Most days, the work is pretty routine. I fly over designated areas, check for signs of unauthorized activity, document what I find, and file reports back at headquarters. Sometimes we catch operations in progress, trucks, workers, active cutting. More often we find evidence after the fact, fresh stumps, truck tracks through areas where there shouldn't be any vehicles, cleared sections where the forest should be intact. The enforcement team handles it from there, following up with investigations and citations. I just provide the eyes in the sky. I've always loved flying, got my pilot's license right after college, worked odd jobs for a few years to save up for helicopter training. There's something about being up there, seeing the landscape from that perspective, that never gets old for me. Even on boring patrol days where nothing happens, I'm grateful to have this job. The Cascade Mountains are absolutely incredible from the air. Ridge after ridge of dense forest, peaks rising up in the distance, rivers cutting through valleys. On clear days, you can see for what feels like forever. That particular morning in November started like any other workday. I got to the regional headquarters around 8 in the morning, grabbed coffee from the break room, checked the weather reports, reviewed my flight plan for the day. We'd gotten reports of unauthorized tree cutting in a protected area about 60 miles northeast of our location. Old-growth forest, completely off limits to any kind of commercial logging operation. But someone had apparently been going in there anyway, probably under cover of darkness or very early morning hours, trying to avoid detection by our regular patrol patterns. My assignment was straightforward: fly over to the reported area, document any damage I could find, get accurate GPS coordinates for the enforcement team to follow up. Standard procedure that I'd done hundreds of times before. The weather looked perfect for it. Clear day, fresh snow on the ground from overnight. Snow is great for this kind of work because it makes everything visible from the air. Tracks stand out, disturbances are obvious, fresh cuts show up as dark patches against white. I brought along a buddy of mine that day, old friend from high school who works in construction now. We'd stayed in touch over the years, got together for beers occasionally, that kind of thing. He'd been bugging me for probably 3 or 4 years to let him ride along on one of these patrol flights. Wanted to see what the job was actually like, experience a helicopter ride over the mountains. I'd always put him off because regulations are pretty strict about passengers on official flights, but I finally had a day where it made sense. The higher-ups approved it since we weren't doing anything classified or particularly dangerous, just a routine damage assessment flight over public lands. He took a vacation day from his construction job just to come along, showed up at the airfield that morning at 8:30 with this huge grin on his face, like a kid on Christmas morning. I'd warned him the night before that it would probably be pretty boring, just flying over trees for a few hours, looking at stumps and taking pictures of damage. He didn't care at all, said he'd never been in a helicopter before and was excited about the whole experience, no matter what we ended up seeing. We spent about 30 minutes doing pre-flight checks together. I showed him how everything worked, explained the basics of helicopter flight and control, walked him through all the safety procedures he needed to know. He was fascinated by all of it, asking questions about every gauge and control panel. I'd forgotten what it was like to see this stuff through completely fresh eyes. After 6 years of doing this job, it's all become routine to me. But to him, every part of it was this new adventure. We had the department-issued camera loaded and ready to go. Standard equipment for these flights, high-quality digital camera with really good zoom capabilities for documenting damage from altitude. The procedure is pretty simple and straightforward. Take clear photos and video of any illegal activity. Mark the GPS coordinates precisely. Make detailed notes about what we observed. Number of trees cut, approximate timeline based on how fresh everything looks, any identifying markers of who might be responsible. Then file a comprehensive report when we get back to headquarters. Nothing fancy or complicated, just thorough documentation that can hold up if the case eventually goes to court. We lifted off around 9:30 that morning from the regional headquarters airfield. The weather was absolutely perfect, crisp and cold, probably around 35 degrees, but crystal clear skies, no clouds anywhere, unlimited visibility in all directions, the kind of day that pilots dream about. My buddy was gripping the edge of his seat during takeoff, eyes wide as dinner plates, trying to take in everything at once. The liftoff, the ground dropping away beneath us, the buildings getting smaller. Once we leveled out and started heading northeast toward our destination, he relaxed a bit and started really enjoying the view. The flight plan I'd filed covered about 60 square miles of remote forest. We were looking for the usual telltale signs of illegal cutting operations, fresh stumps that stand out against the landscape, new roads carved through protected areas where no road should exist, cleared sections and open patches where the forest canopy should be continuous and intact. Sometimes the signs are really obvious. You can spot them from miles away. Other times you have to look much more carefully, especially if whoever's doing the cutting is actively trying to hide their work or cover their tracks. My buddy was absolutely loving it, acting like a kid in a candy store, taking pictures of everything with his phone camera. The scenery was truly incredible that morning. Ridge after ridge of dense, dark green forest stretching out in every direction. Mountain peaks in the distance still holding bright white snow from earlier autumn storms. Frozen streams and small rivers winding through valleys, catching the morning sunlight. Everything dusted with that fresh snow from overnight, making the whole landscape look pristine and completely untouched by human hands. We were flying relatively low for this kind of patrol work, maybe 300 or 400 feet above the forest canopy, following the ridgelines and valleys according to the flight plan I'd mapped out the night before. Low enough to see useful details on the ground, high enough to cover ground efficiently and maintain a safe altitude. The helicopter noise echoed off the mountainsides as we flew. Down below us, the forest just stretched out endlessly. Thousands and thousands of acres of old-growth trees that had been standing there long before any of us were born. Long before there were helicopters or chainsaws or logging companies. About 20 minutes into the flight, we spotted some normal, legal logging activity in a properly permitted zone. There's plenty of legitimate logging in this area, sustainable forestry operations with all the correct permits, following all the environmental restrictions and regulations. You can usually tell the difference immediately when you know what to look for. Legal operations have very clear, defined boundaries. They follow designated access roads. They leave proper buffer zones around streams and waterways to protect the ecosystem. This particular operation looked completely fine, so I just noted it in my log and kept going according to our flight path. Everything was quiet and completely routine for the first hour or so of flying. We saw a small herd of elk moving slowly through a clearing down below, maybe 8 or 10 animals. A few deer bedded down in the snow near the edge of a meadow, barely visible until we were almost directly overhead. My buddy was going absolutely crazy with his phone camera, trying to capture everything he was seeing. I had to remind him a couple times not to lean too far toward the window. Safety always comes first, even when you're excited about wildlife. I did a routine radio check-in with base around 10:30. Everything normal, nothing unusual to report yet. Just covering the assigned grid pattern, documenting the landscape, looking for any anomalies or signs of unauthorized activity. The radio operator back at headquarters confirmed our current position and told us to continue as planned. Standard communication protocol that we follow on every flight. The mountains were absolutely beautiful that day. I've flown over this general area dozens and dozens of times over the past 6 years, but it honestly never gets old or boring. There's something deeply humbling about seeing that much untouched wilderness from above. Makes you realize how small we really are in the grand scheme of things, how much nature exists way beyond our daily human concerns and problems. My buddy kept commenting on how vast it all was, how isolated and remote. Miles and miles in every direction without a single road or building or any kind of human structure visible. Just endless forest and mountains. About 90 minutes into the flight, I spotted something that immediately didn't look right. There was a fresh clearing visible on a protected slope. Several large trees obviously down and cut. The snow made it really stand out. Dark patches of exposed earth and fresh cut wood showing up sharply against the bright white background. I felt that familiar knot forming in my stomach. This was exactly what we'd come out here looking for, but it always bothers me to actually see it. The destruction, the waste, trees that had stood for a century or more, cut down illegally for profit. I immediately circled around to get a better look at the damage and started documenting everything carefully with the camera. You could clearly see truck tracks in the snow, cutting a path through what should have been completely untouched forest. The tracks looked recent, probably made within the last day or two at most, based on how crisp and well-defined they still were. No workers were visible at the site at that particular moment, which wasn't really surprising. These illegal operations usually work very early morning or late evening hours, sometimes even in complete darkness with headlamps. They're trying their best to avoid being spotted by patrols exactly like mine. I did a quick count and estimated maybe 15 to 20 old-growth trees had been felled at this particular site. These were absolutely massive specimens, probably 100 years old at minimum, possibly much older. Each one represented literal decades of slow growth. Part of a complex forest ecosystem that had been thriving in this exact spot long before any logging company ever thought about making money from cutting it down. My buddy was commenting on how incredibly big they were, how long it must have taken them to grow to that size. He works in construction, so he has a real appreciation for wood and lumber, but even he seemed shocked at the scale of the waste. The trees had been cut very cleanly and professionally. Heavy-duty chainsaws, commercial-grade equipment. This definitely wasn't some amateur weekend operation. Whoever was responsible for this knew exactly what they were doing from a technical standpoint. They just didn't care at all that it was completely illegal. Or maybe they'd done the math and figured the potential profit was worth the risk of getting caught and fined. People always seem to underestimate how much we can actually see and document from the air when conditions are good like they were that day. I was carefully getting GPS coordinates for the site, taking photos and video from multiple different angles to build a complete record. This documentation was really important. It needed to be absolutely thorough for the enforcement team to build their case. Photos from different directions showing the full scope. Measurements and counts where possible. Clear, undeniable evidence of the extent of the damage. This kind of solid documentation typically leads to very significant fines and sometimes even criminal charges, depending on the overall scale of the operation and whether this was a first offense or repeat violation. While I was completely focused on documenting the illegal logging site, my buddy's attention was wandering around, taking in the whole surrounding landscape. He's not trained like I am to focus narrowly on specific tasks and objectives. His mind was just freely exploring, looking at everything around us. Which, as it turned out, ended up being really fortunate, because that's when he noticed something else, something completely unexpected that had absolutely nothing to do with illegal logging. My buddy suddenly spoke up and said something like, "Hey, what's that person doing way out here?" I looked over to where he was pointing. There was an old, barely visible abandoned trail maybe half a mile away from the logging site we were documenting. I zoomed in with the camera to get a better look. There was definitely a figure down there. Someone in a gray jacket wearing what looked like a large backpack, hiking completely alone. It immediately struck me as pretty strange and unusual. This location was literally miles and miles from any official maintained trailhead or designated hiking area. Not exactly the kind of remote place where you'd expect to see a casual day hiker just out for a stroll. The terrain here was really rough and challenging. The area was extremely isolated and far from any kind of civilization. I was about to pan the camera back to continue documenting the logging site when something else caught my attention. There was another figure on the same trail, further up behind the hiker in gray, maybe 100 yards back, maintaining that specific distance. Another shape moving along the same path. I zoomed the camera in much closer on this second figure. My breath caught in my throat. It was massive. Absolutely huge, easily 7 or 8 feet tall, possibly even more than that, completely covered in what looked like dark fur or hair, walking fully upright on 2 legs. The arms were noticeably long, swinging naturally with its walking stride in a way that looked completely fluid and normal for this creature's body structure. This definitely, absolutely wasn't a bear. Bears don't walk like that, not with that kind of sustained upright posture and natural bipedal stride. This was something else entirely, something I'd never seen before in 6 years of flying over these mountains. Both my buddy and I went completely, utterly silent. We just watched through the camera and windscreen, didn't say a single word to each other. The creature down below was walking steadily along the trail, maintaining that consistent distance of about 100 yards behind the hiker in gray. It wasn't stalking or hunting in any threatening way, not acting aggressively or predatory, just walking along the same trail, staying that specific distance back, moving at a steady, unhurried pace. I carefully adjusted our flight position to get a better viewing angle, descending slightly to maybe 300 feet. My hands were shaking a bit on the controls, but I managed to keep us steady and hovering. The creature just kept walking below us. Steady, even pace. Nothing at all aggressive or threatening about its movement or body language. Just calmly following the same trail path that the human hiker in gray was using. Through the camera's zoom lens, I could see details that I know I'll never forget for as long as I live. The truly massive shoulder width, much broader than any human, the long, powerful-looking arms. The way the dark fur or hair, it looked almost black, or possibly very dark brown, completely covered its entire body from head to feet. The fur looked thick and shaggy, clearly built perfectly for surviving in these cold mountain conditions. The way it moved was remarkable, natural and fluid. This wasn't awkward or forced movement. This creature was completely comfortable walking upright on 2 legs. This was clearly its normal, natural way of moving through the world. The gait was different from how humans walk. Longer stride length, different rhythm and weight distribution. but unmistakably bipedal locomotion from an intelligent creature. I kept filming, doing my absolute best to hold the camera as steady as possible while simultaneously flying the helicopter. My buddy was completely frozen, gripping his seat with both hands. I could hear him whispering under his breath, "That's not possible, that's not possible," over and over like some kind of mantra. But it was possible. It was real. It was happening right there below us. The creature continued walking for what felt like forever, but was probably only 2 or 3 minutes of real time. Maybe covering 200 yards of trail distance while we hovered and watched. The hiker in gray just kept going, completely unaware as far as I could tell. Walking along at their normal pace like this was just any regular day hike in the mountains. Just another ordinary autumn morning in the wilderness. Meanwhile, this enormous creature was following maybe 100 yards behind them, maintaining that very consistent, specific distance. Then suddenly, without any warning, it just stopped walking completely, right there in the middle of the trail, just stood there motionless for a moment. And then it looked up, directly up toward us, directly at the helicopter hovering above. I could see its eyes clearly through the camera zoom. Dark eyes, intelligent eyes, completely aware and conscious. These weren't the eyes of some dumb animal acting on pure instinct. There was something else there behind those eyes. Recognition, understanding, active thought and consciousness. Some kind of intelligence that I couldn't quite categorize or explain. And then, very slowly and very deliberately, it raised one massive arm up from its side. Not in a threatening way at all, not defensive or aggressive, just raised its hand up high above its head, like someone waving hello across a distance. A clear, unmistakable gesture of acknowledgement. It held that exact position for maybe 3 or 4 seconds, long enough that there was absolutely no mistaking what it was doing or meaning. This wasn't some random coincidental gesture or movement that we were misinterpreting. This wasn't the creature swatting at a bug or scratching its head. This was completely intentional and deliberate. It was clearly saying something to us. It was communicating. I see you up there. You see me down here. We're both aware of each other. Then, just as deliberately and calmly as it had raised its hand, it turned away from us, turned and walked off the trail and into the dense forest. Within just a few seconds, maybe 5 or 6 at most, it was completely gone from view, vanished entirely into the thick trees and undergrowth. No loud crashing through brush that we could hear over the helicopter noise. No obvious path of disturbance marking where it had gone. Just completely, utterly gone, like it had never been there at all. My buddy and I just stared down at the empty forest below for what felt like several minutes. Neither one of us said anything at all. Complete silence in the helicopter except for the engine and rotor noise. Finally, my buddy asked in this quiet, shaky voice, "Did that just happen? Did we really just see that?" My hands were actually trembling visibly on the helicopter controls. I had to consciously focus on keeping us steady and level. I checked the camera to make absolutely sure we'd actually recorded what we'd just witnessed. We had. We'd gotten about 2 full minutes of clear footage showing the creature walking, stopping, looking up at us, and raising its hand. The wave gesture was perfectly visible and obvious in the recording. This wasn't some trick of light or shadow. This wasn't our imagination running wild. This wasn't exhaustion or wishful thinking. It was right there, recorded in high definition on the department camera. I scanned the forest with the camera, looking for any sign of the creature in the trees and undergrowth. Nothing. It was long gone, completely vanished. The hiker in gray was still clearly visible down on the trail, continuing along their path like absolutely nothing had happened. Acting completely normal and casual, just enjoying their hike. totally unaware of what had just been walking behind them a few minutes ago. Or maybe not unaware. I honestly couldn't tell anything from way up here in the helicopter. Part of me wanted to try landing somewhere nearby to warn the hiker, tell them what we'd just seen following them on the trail. But there was nowhere even remotely safe to set down in this terrain. The ground was too rough, too densely forested, too steep. No clearings large enough for a helicopter landing. And besides, warn them about what exactly? The creature had walked away peacefully and calmly. It hadn't shown even the slightest sign of aggression or threatening behavior toward the hiker. What would I even say if I could talk to them? Hey, there's a Bigfoot following you, but don't worry, it seems friendly. That wave gesture just kept playing over and over in my mind, replaying like a loop. The creature saw us hovering up there in the helicopter. It consciously acknowledged our presence. Then it simply left, walked away calmly and peacefully, not hiding in fear or panic, not showing any aggression toward us, just this almost courteous acknowledgement. Like it was calmly and clearly saying, I know you're there watching me. You know I'm here. We're both aware now. We understand the situation. Everything's fine. We're good. I circled around the general area several more times, searching carefully for any additional signs of the creature or any other unusual activity. Didn't see anything else at all, just normal forest. I marked the exact GPS coordinates of where the sighting had occurred, saving them carefully. Then I suddenly remembered I still had an actual job I was supposed to be doing. I needed to finish properly documenting that illegal logging site we'd originally come out here to investigate. We returned to the logging site to complete photographing and documenting the tree cutting damage. But honestly, our hearts really weren't in it anymore. I kept looking back over my shoulder toward where the creature had disappeared into the forest. Kept thinking about what we'd just witnessed, trying to process it, trying to make sense of something that seemed completely impossible but had definitely, absolutely happened. I forced myself to finish the documentation properly because it was literally my job. Got all the required angles and perspectives, made sure I had good, clear evidence that would hold up for the enforcement team to build their case. Then we headed back toward base headquarters around 1 in the afternoon. Still had plenty of fuel, but I was mentally and emotionally exhausted. The entire flight back to headquarters, both of us were mostly silent. Every once in a while, one of us would say something like, "Did we really just see that?" Or "That actually happened, right? We weren't hallucinating?" Neither of us had any kind of satisfying answer. We'd both seen the same thing. The camera had recorded it, but it still felt completely surreal and impossible. We landed back at headquarters and I filed my official report focused entirely on the illegal logging operation. Detailed description of the damage, GPS coordinates, photo documentation, estimated timeline, everything by the book and completely professional. I didn't mention anything at all about the creature. That would have sounded absolutely insane. I'd probably end up getting drug tested or sent for psychological evaluation. My buddy had to start the long drive back to his home that evening. He lived about 3 hours away and needed to get back. Before he left the headquarters, we both agreed very firmly to keep this whole thing just between the two of us for now, not tell anyone else. Who would even believe us anyway? We'd sound like crazy people making up stories. Even with the video footage as evidence, people would probably just assume it was faked somehow, some kind of elaborate hoax or practical joke. After everyone else had left the office for the day, I sat alone at my desk and watched the footage again, and again, and again, probably a dozen times. The wave was absolutely clear as day, crystal clear, no ambiguity at all. This wasn't random movement that could be explained away. This wasn't the wind moving branches. This wasn't shadows playing tricks. This was a very deliberate, very intentional gesture from what was obviously an intelligent being. Acknowledging our presence, communicating with us across that distance. The next few days at work were honestly just a complete blur. I couldn't focus on anything properly. My mind kept wandering back to that moment, kept thinking about that gesture, the wave. What did it actually mean? What was the creature trying to communicate? Why reveal itself at all? Why show itself to us? It easily could have stayed completely hidden in those dense trees and thick undergrowth. We might never have known it was even there at all. The helicopter noise would have warned it of our approach from miles away. It had plenty of time and opportunity to hide, but it chose not to hide. It chose to stay visible on that trail. It chose to acknowledge us when it realized we were watching and filming. That choice felt really significant and meaningful, though I couldn't quite articulate exactly why. The more I thought about the whole encounter, the more intentional everything seemed. That creature absolutely knew we were there in the helicopter long before it stopped and looked up at us. Had to have heard us approaching from a huge distance. Sound carries really well in those mountain valleys. It made a very conscious, deliberate choice to be seen by us, to respond to our presence, to let us know clearly that it was aware of us watching from above. I couldn't stop thinking about the hiker in gray either, that person walking completely alone in such a remote, isolated area. Did they know the creature was there on the trail behind them? Were they aware of being followed, or not really followed, but maybe accompanied? The creature had maintained the distance so deliberately and consistently, not threatening in any way, not stalking like a predator, just present. Just there, sharing the same trail through the forest. The GPS coordinates of the sighting location were completely burned into my memory. I found myself pulling them up on mapping software at least a dozen times that week. Looking at satellite images of the area, studying the terrain. The location was definitely remote and challenging, but it was technically accessible on foot if someone was willing to put in the effort and had decent hiking experience. If I really wanted to, I could drive to the nearest access point and hike into that exact spot. I could walk that same trail myself, maybe find some kind of evidence or traces, maybe begin to understand what had actually happened out there. Finally, after about a week of this mental obsessing, I made the firm decision. I had to go back there. I needed to see that place with my own feet actually on the ground, not from a helicopter hundreds of feet up in the air. I needed to walk that trail myself, maybe find some footprints or other physical evidence. Maybe try to make some kind of sense of this whole impossible experience. I waited until the following weekend when I had 2 days off from work. Told my family I was planning to go on a long day hike by myself to clear my head and get some exercise and fresh air. Didn't mention the real reason behind the trip at all. They would have thought I was completely losing my mind. To be completely honest, I was starting to think maybe I was losing my mind too. I packed relatively light for the hike, a couple liters of water, some trail mix, and energy bars. Basic emergency gear, first aid kit, emergency blanket, flashlight, matches, a good topographic map of the area even though I had GPS, and of course, the camera, just in case I found anything worth documenting. I wasn't really expecting to see the creature again. That would be impossibly lucky, but I wanted to be prepared just in case. The drive from my house took about 3 full hours to reach the nearest forest access road. I had to park at an old, barely maintained logging road turnaround that probably hadn't seen regular use in decades. I checked my GPS carefully. From that parking spot, I had approximately 6 miles of hiking to reach the exact location where we'd seen the creature. Most of it would be cross-country navigation through rough, steep terrain. Not an easy hike by any measure, but definitely doable for someone with decent fitness and experience. I started hiking very early, leaving my truck around 7 in the morning. Cold November morning, heavy frost covering absolutely everything. The temperature was probably in the low 20s. My breath came out in thick clouds. The trail was barely even visible in most places, completely overgrown from obvious lack of use and maintenance. This area clearly didn't get much foot traffic at all. Made perfect sense. It was literally in the middle of nowhere, miles and miles from any maintained trailhead or designated camping area or any kind of facilities. I was carrying bear spray on my belt. Not really because I was particularly worried about encountering bears, it just felt right and responsible to have something for self-defense just in case. But I also somehow knew, in some way I couldn't quite explain or articulate, that I probably wouldn't actually need to use it, some instinct or intuition telling me I'd be safe out there. The first 2 miles of hiking were relatively easy and straightforward. I was still following those old logging roads from decades ago, mostly level ground. A bit overgrown, but still clearly defined and easy to navigate. Then the trail conditions got much more difficult and rougher. I started climbing steadily up the mountainside, gaining significant elevation with each mile. My legs were burning from the constant upward effort. The forest surrounding me was incredibly quiet that morning, almost eerily so. Just the sound of wind moving through the trees high overhead, occasional bird calls echoing in the distance. Nothing else at all, no other hikers, no sounds of civilization, just pure, undisturbed wilderness in every direction. I checked my GPS regularly to make absolutely sure I was still heading in the correct direction toward my target coordinates. The actual terrain matched remarkably well with what I'd seen from the helicopter several days earlier. Ridge after ridge of incredibly dense forest. Massive, ancient trees that must have been standing in these exact spots for hundreds of years. The old growth sections were absolutely breathtaking. Made me think again about that illegal logging site, about people actively destroying something this magnificent and irreplaceable just to make a quick profit. Around mile 4, the trail became extremely hard to follow, really challenging navigation. I had to rely primarily on GPS coordinates and recognizable landmarks, distinctive rock formations, unusual or particularly large trees, natural features that stood out. There was a cold creek crossing where I had to carefully pick my way across on slippery rocks. The water was absolutely freezing. Then I had to climb over several massive fallen logs, push through really dense brush and undergrowth that grabbed at my clothes and pack. This definitely wasn't easy or casual hiking terrain. Finally, after about 3.5 hours of steady hiking, I reached the ridgeline where the original sighting had occurred. I recognized the terrain immediately, even from this completely different ground level perspective. This was definitely the right place. The exact spot where the creature had been walking when we saw it from above, where it had stopped and looked up at our helicopter, where it had raised its massive hand in that unforgettable gesture of acknowledgement. I stood right there on the barely visible trail and looked slowly around in all directions. The forest felt completely and utterly different from ground level compared to the aerial view. So much more dense and closed in, quiet in a way that felt ancient and almost sacred. There was a real weight to this place, a presence, not threatening or malevolent at all, just deeply old, like these mountains and these trees had been standing here for countless centuries and would continue standing here long after I was gone and forgotten. I walked very slowly and carefully along the trail, looking intently for any possible signs of what had been here, any evidence at all. Near the tree line, in an area where the ground was softer and more soil than rock, I suddenly found something that made my heart start racing. Tracks, massive footprints pressed deep into the partially frozen ground. They were partially filled in with snow, but still clearly visible and unmistakable. at least 18 inches long, maybe even 20, maybe more. 5 very distinct toe impressions visible at the front of each print. Deep impressions too, pressed way down into the soil. Whatever had made these tracks was incredibly, extraordinarily heavy. I very carefully followed the visible tracks for about 50 yards or so deeper into the forest. They seemed to be leading toward much rockier ground where they eventually just disappeared. Couldn't see any more prints once I got to the area where everything was just solid rock. I took extensive photos of the clearest footprints with my camera, measured them carefully with my hand for scale reference in the photos. These were absolutely, completely real. Not my imagination playing tricks. Not some natural formation that kind of looked like prints. Real physical evidence that something genuinely massive and bipedal had walked through here very recently. I found a good-sized fallen log and sat down to rest. Just spent time watching and listening carefully to the surrounding forest. An hour passed quietly, then another full hour. Nothing unusual happened at all during that time. No strange sounds, no movement except wind and the occasional bird. Just peaceful wilderness. But somehow, I still didn't feel entirely alone out there. I can't really explain this feeling properly, just this persistent sense of presence. Like something was out there watching from a safe distance, not approaching, not threatening in any way, just aware. Just watching and waiting to see what I would do. I pulled some trail mix and an apple out of my pack and left them at the base of a particularly large and ancient-looking cedar tree. It felt like the right thing to do somehow, like leaving some kind of offering or gift. I said very quietly, speaking out loud to the empty forest, "Thank you for letting us see you." I felt absolutely ridiculous and silly saying it out loud to apparently nobody. But it also felt like something that genuinely needed to be said, some kind of acknowledgement of what had happened here. Around 2 in the afternoon, with the sun starting to sink lower, I reluctantly started hiking back out toward where I'd left my truck. I had a long way to go and absolutely did not want to still be out on these trails after dark. The temperature would drop significantly once the sun went down. Plus, navigation would become much more difficult and potentially dangerous without daylight. About a mile from where I'd parked my truck, the rough trail I'd been following joined up with a slightly more maintained and established path. I was lost in my own thoughts, replaying everything in my mind, when I suddenly noticed someone else hiking toward me from the opposite direction, a person approaching on the trail. The first human I'd seen all day out here in this remote area. As we got closer to each other, my heart absolutely started pounding hard in my chest. The approaching hiker was wearing a gray jacket, the exact same gray jacket I'd seen in our helicopter footage, carrying a large, well-worn backpack that also looked extremely familiar. This was the same person, had to be. The hiker who'd been on the trail when we saw the creature following behind them. We both naturally slowed down as we got closer to each other on the narrow trail. He looked to be somewhere in his 60s, maybe early 70s. Deeply weathered, tanned face like someone who has spent countless years outdoors in all kinds of weather. The look of a very serious, experienced backpacker who knows these mountains intimately. We exchanged friendly nods as we approached within speaking distance of each other. Basic trail courtesy. "Good day for a hike," he said pleasantly. His voice was calm and friendly. "Yeah, absolutely beautiful out here," I replied, trying to keep my own voice steady and normal. We started to pass each other on the trail, and I thought that would be it. Just a brief, polite encounter with another hiker. But then he suddenly stopped walking, turned to look at me much more carefully, almost studying my face, like he was trying to decide something important. "Can I ask you something kind of strange?" he said. His tone was serious now. "Sure, go ahead," I said. My pulse was suddenly racing even faster. My throat felt dry. "Did you see anything unusual up there on that trail?" he asked, gesturing back the direction I'd come from. My mind was spinning. My first instinct was to deny everything, to play dumb, and claim I had no idea what he was talking about. But something in his eyes stopped me from lying, some look of understanding or knowledge. "Maybe," I finally said very carefully. "What exactly do you mean by unusual?" He smiled slightly at my cautious response. "I mean, did you happen to see a Bigfoot up there?" The word just hung there in the cold air between us. Bigfoot, spoken out loud so casually, so matter-of-factly, like he was asking about seeing a deer or a hawk. I took a long moment before answering, trying to figure out how to respond. Finally, I just told the truth. "Yes," I said. "Just a little while ago, I found tracks, big footprints. But also several days ago, I saw one from a helicopter. I was flying over this area." "Then you saw me," he said calmly. "I'm the hiker. It was walking behind on the trail. Though I should clarify, following isn't really the right word to describe what was happening." We both stepped off to the side of the trail and found a relatively flat spot where we could talk more comfortably. He explained that he'd been hiking throughout these particular mountains for over 40 years, started coming out here in his 20s, seen them many times over those decades, the creatures. "Them?" I interrupted. "You're saying there's more than just one?" "At least 3 individuals in this general area that I know of for certain," he said matter-of-factly, "possibly more. The specific one you saw from your helicopter, I've been encountering him semi-regularly for about 5 years now. We see each other out here on the trails maybe a few times each year. He keeps his distance from me, I keep mine from him. That day you saw us, that was actually a special, unusual occasion when he wasn't afraid at all and came much closer than normal. Sometimes we're out here on the trail at the exact same time, but he has never once been aggressive or threatening toward me in any way. I had literally a million questions racing through my mind, but I forced myself to just stay quiet and let him talk. Let him share what he knew. "You people," he said, and I could tell he meant outsiders, people not familiar with these mountains. "You make them out to be these terrible monsters, dangerous, aggressive, predators that attack humans. But he's not a predator at all, not even slightly. He's just another creature living peacefully in these forests, trying to survive and exist like everything else out here." Over the years, I've watched him gather berries from bushes, dig for roots in soft ground, catch fish from streams with his bare hands. Never once have I seen him actively hunt any other animals. He eats what he finds. He's very cautious around people, shy even. But I don't think it's because he's afraid of us. It's more that he genuinely wants to be left completely alone. He wants to live his life without interference. I asked him if he'd ever tried to approach one of them directly, get closer. "Once, many years ago when I was younger and more foolish," he said with a slight smile. He made it extremely clear through his body language and movements that me approaching wasn't welcome at all, not aggressively or violently. He just moved away quickly and kept increasing the distance between us, so I learned to respect that boundary completely. Now when we encounter each other out here, we simply acknowledge each other's presence, a look, maybe a pause. Then we both continue going our separate ways. And that's genuinely all it needs to be. That's a respectful relationship. He looked at me very seriously then, directly in the eyes. "Did you tell anyone else about what you saw from that helicopter?" he asked. "Just my friend who was with me in the aircraft," I answered honestly. "No one else knows." "Good," he nodded with clear approval. "Please keep it that way. These creatures have survived for who knows how many generations by staying hidden and avoiding human contact. They absolutely do not need people coming out here with cameras and guns and tracking equipment. They don't need to be captured or studied or proven to exist. They just need to be left alone to live their lives in peace." I told him about the wave gesture we'd seen, the creature raising its hand toward our helicopter. He smiled warmly at that. "He's done that gesture before with me too," he said, "several times over the years. It's his way of communicating. I see you, you see me, we're both aware, everything is fine between us. He's probably heard and noticed your helicopter flying over these mountains many times before this encounter. He understands what it is. He knows it's not a threat to him. That day, he wanted you to know very clearly that he's aware, that he sees you watching. That's honestly a real privilege, you know. Most people never, ever get the kind of direct acknowledgement from them. You should feel honored." We ended up talking for another 30 minutes or so, standing there beside the trail as the afternoon light gradually faded. He shared several other encounter stories from over his decades of hiking these mountains. Always respectful encounters, always maintaining distance, never threatening or dangerous. He told me about finding their shelters sometimes, crude lean-tos constructed from broken branches and bark, signs of their presence scattered throughout these forests if you know exactly what to look for and pay close attention. But he also emphasized how remarkably good they are at staying completely invisible when they choose to hide. They know every single inch of these mountains intimately, he explained. Every trail, every ridge, every valley, every cave. We're just temporary visitors out here. They're the permanent residents. They belong here. This is their home. The best thing we can possibly do is respect that fact completely. I asked him if he thought they were happy that some humans know about their existence. He considered my question carefully for a moment before answering. "I think they understand and accept that they can't stay completely hidden forever," he said slowly. "There are too many people coming into these woods nowadays, too many hikers and hunters and tourists. But as long as we leave them in peace, don't try to capture them or exploit them or prove they exist to the world, they seem generally content with that arrangement. They'll continue living their lives, we'll continue living ours. Sometimes our paths cross briefly, then we go our separate ways." We exchanged contact information, though both of us somehow knew we probably wouldn't actually talk again after today. This felt like a one-time conversation, a sharing of knowledge and experience. Before he continued on up the trail toward his destination, he paused and looked at me one final time. "Enjoy the privilege of what you saw," he said seriously, "but maybe consider keeping it to yourself, not posting it online or telling everyone. They've earned their privacy through all these years. They deserve to be left alone." I hiked back to my truck in a complete daze. My mind was spinning, trying to process everything the hiker had told me, everything he'd shared. It all made so much sense when he explained it. These creatures aren't monsters or mysteries that need to be solved by science. They're not cryptids or paranormal phenomena. They're intelligent beings trying to live their lives peacefully in these remote mountains, just trying to survive and exist like every other living thing. That wave gesture we'd captured on video, it wasn't just simple acknowledgement, it was trust in a way. A form of trust I'd never really considered. Trust that we would see them, document them, and then ultimately leave them alone. Trust that we wouldn't use that footage to bring chaos and invasion into their quiet existence. During the long drive back home, I found myself thinking about that illegal logging site we'd documented. Humans actively destroying their habitat for pure profit, cutting down trees that had stood for a century or more, while these creatures asked for literally nothing except to be left in peace. The contrast really bothered me, still bothers me deeply every time I think about it. I still have that footage saved on my personal computer. I watch it sometimes, especially the precise moment when the creature raises its massive hand in that unmistakable gesture. I haven't shown it to anyone else besides my buddy who was there with me. Not because I don't completely believe what we saw and documented. I know with absolute certainty that it was real. But because the hiker I met was absolutely right, these beings have earned their privacy through decades or maybe centuries of staying hidden. They deserve to be left alone. Sometimes I think about going back to that spot again, hiking in there, sitting quietly and watching. But then I realize that's really not necessary. I had my encounter. I got my acknowledgement from that creature. That's genuinely more than most people ever get in their entire lifetimes, more than I probably deserved in the first place. Now, the best thing I can possibly do is exactly what I've been doing since that day. Keep the secret safe. Respect the boundary between our worlds. Do my job protecting the forests where they live from illegal destruction. And remember that simple wave, that gesture that communicated so clearly. We see each other, we understand each other, now let's both go our own separate ways and live our lives. That's all it really needs to be. The forests keep their mysteries and their secrets. And honestly, some mysteries absolutely should stay that way. Not everything needs to be proven scientifically or explained completely. Some things just need to be quietly respected. And that's enough. That's more than enough. For more interesting stories, check this out.